And let's see. Let me see any other things. I think that's it. I will ask that you mute yourselves just to respect background noise. That would be great. Thank you. I will also mute. Oops. Let me unmute. Oh, we have to unmute you. Yeah.
Got it.
Thank you. So welcome everyone to Respect Time. We will begin. So let's take a moment and arrive. Grateful for our breath and grateful to you, James, for making time for joining the community and us in dialogue. Welcome. So I'll just kind of share a little bit where this started. Several weeks ago, I was listening to an interview on NPR with you, James, and I was just like, my gosh, this is what we've been talking about. And then I texted a group, and several of them are on this call. And I was like, you've got to hear this. You've got to hear this. And so people tuned on, and they were listening. And then we're like, we got to read this. We got to read this. And then we were like, we got to bring him here. We got to bring him here. And so I want to just say thank you, James, first for having the curiosity, the unbounded curiosity to explore this, and also being generous. You being here in our community is generous with your time. And so with your being generous with these interviews and sharing, it makes such a difference. It's how we picked it up. And so I just wanted to say thank you to you for giving your time and your passion. And I shared kind of this, I come with a place of enthusiasm to you because we've been talking about this so much in the yoga community as teachers and practitioners and yoga therapists. And this book is actually a book that I've given to a lot of my clients because now it's a very accessible book to educate with, more than some of the esoteric, sometimes yoga texts that we have. And so I look forward to it being used more. But I want to just first hear from you. Are you surprised by the response?
Oh, for sure. You know, you never know what you're going to get when you release a book, and you really don't know what you're going to get when you release a book during a pandemic where distribution lines are messed up, production's messed up. I mean, it was such a hassle to get this thing together all in time, and we did not expect much was going to happen, at least at the beginning. You know, we thought maybe a few months down the road it would take a while to start to catch on, but yeah, we've been really surprised and really grateful. It's been exhausting but exciting the whole way through.
And there was a lot of wow moments that I had, and one of them was the catacombs. Was it in Montparnasse?
Yeah.
And that, I was like, okay, he's gone to a whole other level of exploring this breath. And I wanted to just have you talk about it a little bit and share, and even what that was a wow moment for me. Was it also a wow moment for you?
Well, yeah, I had heard from these biological anthropologists. This was, you know, pretty early in my research, that the human skull had shifted and changed in the last few hundred years, which I had never heard of before. I figured I would have heard about that in a biology class or an anthropology class, but I never had. And they said to really understand it, you need to go see it for yourself. And this was before I had a chance to go with Mariana Evans to the Morton collection. So I decided to go to Paris. I was there on doing some other work and got an opportunity to go down to one of the largest graveyards in the world, which is below the streets of Paris. Few people know that, but there's 6,000 skeletons below the streets of Paris. And it was one of the most surreal experiences I've ever been to. And I'll give people a little. I'll try to share some slides here, because I think that the pictures speak louder than words here. So, give me 1 second. So, this is what the oldest human jaw looked like. This is 300,000 years old. And check out its teeth. You know, this guy didn't need extractions, didn't need braces, orthodontics. Perfectly straight teeth. Even further back, here's a model of the skull. Perfectly straight teeth, once again. So this is what's happened in the last 2,000 years here. That skull is about 2,000 years ago. This is about 800 years ago. And as we go forward, we're going forward in time until we get to a modern skull. And you can notice how thin that jaw is becoming, how small that mouth is becoming. So that's where we are right now. And this was really shocking to me, because when we have too small of a mouth, we don't have room for our teeth, and we can look like that. We also have, this is what's happened to our profiles. So they've done these studies in which every single ancient skull is above that line, that perpendicular line. And now 90% of modern skulls are behind it. So this is the new modern skull. That's our profile. And where this becomes a real big problem is when we breathe, because what happens when you have a mouth that's too small is you have a smaller airway. So you can watch what's happening to that airway there. So that is our current condition. This is one of the main reasons we snore, why we have sleep apnea, why we have other respiratory problems. And so, I mean, I could go on and on with that, but I'll just stop right there. And so I wanted to see the actual skulls. I didn't want to see pictures. My job as a journalist is to go out in the field and experience things for myself and try to write about them. So I went to Paris and went down there and saw a bunch of skulls, sort of right at the moment in which the industrialized world really started shifting on a mass scale. And we found a bunch of skulls from around 1830, I think. And they all had those small mouths and messed up jaws. And we are, you know, the generations after that, they were our ancestors. And we continue to have this mouth that's too small for our faces, which I just thought was the most bizarre story, but it's all true. And I think, as I hopefully demonstrated there, you can look up almost any ancient skull, perfectly straight teeth, almost any modern skull, crooked teeth.
So the mewing, the chewing, the diet, like it was well explained. Is there capacity to not continue this trajectory?
There is. I mean, if we've broken our breathing, we can fix it, right? And almost just as easily, sometimes even more easily. But it really starts in your youth, and it starts at infancy, to start building healthy breathing habits, start building the jaw, start building the face, move everything outward so your airway opens up. You know, but I found that even people in adulthood and middle age can vastly improve their airway health, which is what I showed using this device to help expand my palate. And we showed huge benefits. And this is a known thing. And this is where orthodontics are going. This idea that we're going to fix crooked teeth by just putting on braces and headgear, we're going to look back in 50 years and just be horrified. That is, it might straighten teeth. It's not good for your airway. And if you don't have a good airway, nothing that is ever going to work right.
Yeah, that's a big contemplation, all this orthodontic work going on and how useful it is. But I do see a trend in jaw surgery, in dentistry, and it's all about making space.
This is exactly what's happening. And I'm just projecting. I'm not a dentist, right? I'm not a dental surgeon or rhinologist, but what I'm telling you is what I've heard from some leaders in the field. And they were all saying the same thing. About how we've been treated in the past, and I'm a victim of that. I had braces, extractions, headgear, all that stuff, and how we're going to be treating people in the future. So there's no finger pointing; it's no one's fault specifically, but science has no endpoint. It's constantly moving, and so as we're constantly learning, we should be improving our treatments to improve our health. And the vast majority of the orthodontists that I've talked to that have reached out have been on this stuff for 20, 30 years. They're like, why would you want to move something back when you can move it forward and open that airway? I just think it's interesting that you can do this in adulthood. You can vastly improve your airway health in adulthood, which is really inspiring.
Yes. Yeah. And I think it reflects, even that belief system that we're born with a certain number of neurons and we really don't have the plasticity, and then all of a sudden it's blown out of the water and we see that we can. And it's another testimony to really how amazing the human body is, the capacity. You've written a book also about deep diving, and it seems that are you a deep diver too?
Yeah, that book did have free diving in it, which is just using a single breath of air.
Yeah.
Using your lungs as your air tank. And these people have trained themselves to hold their breath 7, 8, 9 minutes, dive down 300, 400 feet. All of this was supposed to be scientifically, medically, biologically impossible. Yeah. And here they are doing it. So it just shows you what the true potential locked within us. And I think we've really lost touch with that in the last 300 years of industrialization.
Yeah. I'll continue down this path, but I want to go back to something you shared. The opening of the book, you talked about some of the statistics, and I think it was like 40% have kind of nasal imbalances, and then I think over half are mouth breathers. Like that was huge. And I was wondering, because you're speaking about children, was that adults or is that children?
Those estimates are all over the place. I've seen from 15% to 75%, and that is inclusive of children. But children, even more than adults, are more often habitual mouth breathers. Probably over 50% is several studies have shown. A lot of which have been done in Brazil. It has this huge initiative to stop mouth breathing, which is interesting. But it's a huge problem, and people think it's air. It doesn't matter. I take it from my mouth, my nose. It's the same thing. It's not. And any rhinologist who's done any research in this will tell you and will show you.
So we were talking a little bit earlier about public health policy, and curious if there's always room to expand health policy. If you could create some type of policy to implement around this, have you ever thought about what would you recommend?
I think that the tools are right in front of us. They're freely available to everyone of every walk of life. Breathing is something we carry with us all the time. We do it 25,000 times a day. So as opposed to telling someone that they need to change their diet and go vegan or paleo or keto or whatever, breathing is something that is really accessible. So I think you start with the foundations of what healthy breathing is, which a lot of people don't know, which I didn't know a few years ago when I went into this field, which none of my friends had ever heard about. They thought breathing was breathing. But we know eating's not eating. It depends on what you eat. So, and we know that not all exercise is the same either. So how you breathe absolutely affects your mental, physical, psychic health. I mean, all those things. Specific policy, I think it would just start with learn how to nasal breathe, learn how to breathe slower, learn how to really engage your diaphragm, because there's so much in that, so many benefits from that. Breathe less than you think you should. That seems counterintuitive to a lot of people, but but the science is clear on that as well.
And do you believe that this needs to start with children, like in school? Like there's room
Oh,
for this?
it has to, because it's so much harder once your bones have already modeled, once your face has already been made, to try to improve it. But it's very easy for children and for infants. And to me, the studies I think are so interesting is when they look at mothers who have breastfed a infant for 2 years versus those who have been bottle fed. And those who have breastfed have lower incidences of snoring and sleep apnea and other respiratory problems, which makes sense because their faces, through all that stress, have been pulled out. So they have a larger airway, and actually changes the structure of the face, which is, they have in dentistry, they have something called a name for it, adenoid face, which is when the adenoids or tonsils are constantly inflamed, you can't breathe through your nose, it's clogged. You have to open your mouth, and your face starts to grow like that. So you see like the bad parts of having poor oral posture and what it can do to your breathing, but you can also just as easily improve it and have good habits, and they've shown that as well.
So I have one more question, and then I'd love to open it up for questions. So if you want to put your question in, or just get ready to raise your hand and hear, we'd love to hear your voice. That would be awesome. What was your favorite part of this book? Like, do you have a favorite section? Did you have a favorite uncovering?
I think the fact that evolution doesn't work in a straight line absolutely blew me away. That evolution is a process of change, and evolution can mean changes that are detrimental to our health. Is something I never heard about. I'd always thought it was survival of the fittest. And learning that gave me a lot of context of what's happened to our own species and other species. But you can see how something detrimental can so quickly become detrimental, but why can't you then bring that around and realign it and rebalance it? And of course we can do that, which is what I think so much of communities around yoga and wellness are trying to do, to get us back to that balance that we started off with before so much of the industrial lifestyle. By that, I mean sitting in front of a computer, which I do all day, every day, eating nothing but soft foods, not hunting or gathering anything. It's had a big effect on us. So, we have the ability to change ourselves for better or for worse. And that's really empowering. We're not a lost cause. We can't just blame genetics. We can blame our environmental inputs, and we can change those inputs and thus share in better health.
So there was a lot of techniques that you use, and my frame is yoga, and many of us are yoga, and so I reflected so much on whether it was the perfect breath. I saw it as Samavriti, which is a breath of finding balance, exactly that kind of rhythm. Then there was, the breaths of cleansing breaths. That's about basically stressing it out and getting it activated for reset. And then you have the breaths of the pauses, the retention, that are so critical. As far as, I think in the book, what was interesting for me is like, I could pick up that you practice these breaths. These are you have a breath practice, and you use them for your own self-care. And also, I think I heard in an interview how you were very clear that the practices must meet the person's needs. And do you see that there's a general need of certain things as far as with these breath practices? Like, when you had the recommendation of some of these breaths, like even Nadi Shodhana, and I'll say something about Nadi Shodhana. It's a number one, top hit in the yoga world. And because of the nerve fibers that are in the right and left nostril, there is an invitation to open both nostrils equally. But our nature is the nasal cycle, which is to fluctuate. That's the nature. And so the breaths are sometimes geared to go against the nature, but for a reason. And I just would love to kind of hear you reflect on that a little bit, that going against the nature.
Well, I think if we were in a natural environment in which we were able to live naturally in the cycles of nature, we wouldn't need a lot of breath work. Um, but I think that there are so many stresses in the modern world that we constantly have to seek balance throughout the day. And I would look at Nadi Shodhana as exactly one of those things. You're out of balance. These different nostrils correlate to either a rest and relax position or a more sympathetic, activated position. So you can use those. And that's what I think is fascinating about breathing is there are these different levers you can turn on and turn off to adjust your mood. But to me, the point is to always to use them to stay balanced, because whenever you find yourself going out of balance, you should get back in balance again. If you go too far out, then it's that much harder to find that balance, to regain it. So many of these different, I tried not to go down too deep into specific breathing patterns, because what I found is they're all grouped and doing so much of the same thing. There's the people doing the Wim Hof Tuma that say this is the only way to do it. The Buteyko people who say you can only breathe slowly, never breathe too fast. These are different tools for different needs. And so many pranayamas will do the same. And so much of Chinese breathing, Qigong, is similar to other pranayamas, which is similar to ancient Greek breathing, which is similar. I mean, everyone discovered these things at different times, but they all, if you measure them, they do the same thing, which is what I think is interesting about, to have a subjective experience of these is great. Change your feelings. You'll have a different perception. You feel better. That's fine. But unless there's some objective data behind it, I find that that's only so useful. And that's what I really tried to look at is what does the body of science say about each of these things, how it affects all of us? Because this book wasn't about what was happening in my body. It was about what's happening in everyone's bodies when they're breathing in these certain ways. And that's where I thought it would be most useful, And I know that people have told me as they're reading through, they're starting to breathe in these certain ways and starting to feel these certain things. That's perfect. It's like a scratch and sniff book, but you're using your breathing instead to feel these things. And that was really the message, to take these tools, not to go down too far into one or the other, but to look at the whole technology of breathing. And then people can take that and use those specific technologies for what suits them best.
Well said. So, Anna, I think your hand was up and you also have a question. Anna Bryan, do you want to ask it?
Sure. Sorry, I'm in the dark here. I have a question about, James, your thought about using just carbon dioxide. And were you surprised with how powerful a chemical that is in our systems, and how in the past just the building up of carbon dioxide allowed such euphoria? I remember you and I can't remember the partner, were running through Golden Gate Park or something, and all of a sudden you got to the point where your carbon dioxide level obviously rose pretty high, and there was a sense of total euphoria. I'm just wondering if you could, reflect for us on that.
Yeah, he was much more acclimated to have a higher tolerance of CO2, and so was able to reach that. I never quite reached that. A lot of what I felt was slight suffocation, but through more training, you can feel that. And we know that so many people view carbon dioxide as this negative thing, and it is in the atmosphere. There's too much of it. It's causing global warming, climate change. It's causing problems in the ocean. We know that, but in your body, you have to have a proper balance.
Got it. I had two people trying to find it for me, and they did it.
Not sure what happened there, but you really need that balance of both CO2 and oxygen to function properly. What I thought was interesting, what I had to cut so much from the book because of space, is this history of CO2 therapy that is at least 100 years old and was conducted at Yale. There was several studies conducted at the University of Wisconsin, Boston College. They showed it had an amazing effect on epilepsy and schizophrenia. And now it's being re-explored for epilepsy 70 years after it was discovered. And I know this sounds like sketchy stuff, but you can look up in PubMed, which is the National Institutes of Health database, and find those studies, which is crazy that, you know, something was found to work for 70 years and then forgotten about, and now here it is again. But that's why I call it the new science of a lost art. This pattern just kept happening over and over and over again.
I practice, I'm an anesthesiologist, and we have a screening tool in ambulatory anesthesia called Stop Bang. It's a way for me to determine whether people are high risk for sleep apnea. And I see it every day. So it's, you know, it's a mnemonic. Do you snore? Are you tired? Do you have periods of obstruction? Do you have hypertension? Is your body mass index over 30? Is your neck circumference greater than 16? Are you a male? And 4 out of 8 correlate with the pretty high risk for sleep apnea. And so, but just the treatment of sleep apnea with CPAP machines forces people to breathe through their mouth. It's, you know, the positive pressure that pushes air to allow mouths to stay open so that the airways can stay open for patients to be able to sleep through the night without snoring. I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on that versus just, you know, suggesting that they tape their lips shut. I mean, that's, you know, for somebody who's thin and I think is low risk, I think that's a great tool. But for somebody whose BMI is 40 and has a thick neck, already has hypertension, I just, you know, but just the treatment of sleep apnea, the whole thing is just very curious to me. So I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I'm going to be talking with Dr. Stephen Park, who is one of the world's authorities on sleep apnea and CPAPs as well on Wednesday, to ask him specific questions in regards to this. So we know that CPAPs are absolute lifesavers for people. If you can't breathe at night, you are in big trouble. And we know that. But, you know, I can't diagnose whether sleep tape's going to work for one person with a 40 BMI or not. I can say that there are various procedures that can open an airway and allow people to get through the night much more easily. CPAP is great for the symptoms, but it's not doing anything for the core problem. And what all these people are saying is you have to address this core problem, or it's going to keep coming back, or someone's going to be on CPAP for 30 years. And that's what Stephen Park's book, it's called Sleep Interrupted. I think for you, an anesthesiologist, you'd be fascinated by it, because he's he's a surgeon and an otorhinolaryngologist, and he's at the top of the field and is saying some pretty revelatory things in that book. I know that I will say mouth taping for various people who have written have said that it's gotten rid of their snoring, and very, very quickly. My father-in-law is a pulmonologist, and he did it, and he said he was not snoring. He could not believe it worked, but then, you know, you look at it and it's so simple. Of course it works. And so he's very excited about this as well. There's just no study. There's no money to do studies of people CPAP versus mouth tape. No one's going to do mouth taping is free. There's no one can make any money off of it, you know?
Yeah.
Oh, that's a
Thank you.
sad statement that they won't study it because they can't make money off of it.
I'm not saying anyone. I'm just saying the amount of things that are being studied. It would be a very simple study to take a group of people, have them mouth tape with mild or moderate sleep apnea and snoring, and another group that don't have it. And Stanford is actually, they are putting together a study, I think, with 200 people that they're just sort of getting running now. They're taking a huge initiative in breathing, which is so exciting, because one of the top research institutions in the world is really heading into this stuff.
Fantastic. Wonderful. So I want to go through some questions. So there's a question here from Anna Bryan. Did you come to any observations about exercise that becomes so winded people have to breathe through their mouth? Should breathing through the mouth be a guide to becoming overly exerted in exercise?
So what I heard from a breathing therapist, Patrick McEwen, and from Anders Olsen was you should exercise to the level at which you can breathe correctly. If you are exercising over that level and forcing yourself to, you need to slow down and slowly work up to that state. And you can look at the work from Dr. John Duyar and Phil Maffetone. In the 70s and 80s, they were saying the same exact thing. The thing is, we're very impatient people. So people are going to go out and jog and be like, I can't do this. I got to breathe through my mouth. It's the only way I can breathe. This takes time. It can take a few weeks. They've even said up to a couple of months to really establish healthy nasal breathing. But once you do that, the benefits are profound. They are not subtle. And check out the work by Duyar and Maffetone, and you'll see these are people who train Olympians, triathletes, tennis stars, basketball teams, and that's the first thing they do is establish nasal breathing.
Thank you. Yeah, it actually, there's some routines that I do that are kind of more fitness, and I switch to mouth breathing, and it's been interesting to see my recovery. That's been like the ease of recovery from exertion. It's been.
Well, you're going to get 20% more oxygen just breathing through your nose. That means you can take 20% less breaths. It's what people really have a hard time with is that level of CO2 that stimulates the need to breathe. It's not from oxygen, it's from CO2. So once your tolerance for CO2 goes up, it will become easier. And a lot of people say, there's no way I'm getting enough oxygen. If you've got a pulse oximeter, you can buy them for $20. You can see that your oxygen levels are fine. I mean, I went to a neighborhood gym and we were pedaling as hard as we could and breathing 6 times a minute. Very deep breaths, which should, that was about a quarter of what I would usually be breathing. And my blood sats were 97, 98% the whole way through. I felt like I needed to breathe because of that CO2. So I think that advice, if you feel like you can't get enough breath, slow down, take it slow, and build up that nasal respiratory fitness.
Yeah, and it's a whole different conversation, but this gets, the perspective of cardiovascular health, at least in the yoga lens, it's about how much effort can you have with the least amount of breath. And it's totally the opposite. They do these stress tests, and it's just opposite mentality of health and cardiovascular, respiratory health.
But the least amount of breaths is building up your CO2 tolerance, which is a good thing. You're going to increase your circulation as well. So again, I just see all these systems kind of doing the same thing in slightly different ways with different language. It's fascinating.
Okay, Laura. So her question is, you described the work of Strauss, who manipulated bodies to stretch and open the diaphragm and more. It reminded me of some stretches in yoga class. Perhaps Miriam can speak to poses while James describes the Strauss work to those who may not have read the book yet. Well, you're pretty familiar with yoga, so I'm wondering if there's anything, like any particular, at least one asana you could speak to.
Well, the way that I've been viewing yoga ever since I talked to DeRose and learned about the history of the Indus Valley civilization is, the first yoga was breathing. There wasn't even moving. And then the next yoga was holding one pose, not repeating anything, and breathing. And guess what all of these do, right? You're stretching, you're breathing into one lung, you are increasing the flexibility in all of your respiratory muscles and to your diaphragm and to your rib cage. So what it is doing is really increasing your respiratory health. And I think that is one of the main benefits of yoga. There are many other benefits, but it's because it's allowing you to stretch and to stay flexible and to help keep your lungs working properly. If you look at these emphysemics, I'll show you another video here, which shows some of Strauss' work, because when I wrote about this, people are like, oh, this is absolutely impossible. And until you see the data, until you see the videos. So this is pretty interesting. One moment here. I'm going to share my screen.
The Krishnamacharya Mohan lineage, it's always taught that the asanas are there to help you develop the breath. Like that's the point of it, to And so that idea of free diving, you're stretching your lungs. It's like you're making space for that prana prior to that, the prana, the vital life force that we have in carbon dioxide and oxygen.
Sure. Yeah, no, that's fascinating. So this is someone with emphysema who was basically left for dead in a hospital. They didn't know what to do with this guy. So Stow comes in, and all he did was to show this man diaphragmatic movement. So this is how he was breathing. He had no diaphragmatic movement. So it was constant tensing in his chest. This is the only way he could get air in. And the next shot is of his stomach. You see what an awkward movement this is to breathe. And this was him after a few weeks of just learning proper diaphragmatic movement. He was not completely restored, but on the path to recovery. And the next shot here, that's him after a few weeks of just breathing, and that was him before. And here he is again afterwards. So you can see that difference. And Stow, what he did is, which I think was so interesting, is he went from helping people who, I think my screen share is off now, who had emphysema, to then helping Olympians and athletes, and the same exact techniques. And these athletes went on to win more gold medals at the 1968 Olympics than any other track and field team, I think, still to this date. So it just shows you that everyone can benefit from from breathing properly and engaging your diaphragm. You don't want to overwork your body 25,000 times a day. It's just going to break down after a while. You want to make things as easy for it as possible.
So Yvette asks, could you speak to the carbon dioxide and oxygen ratio that you wrote about? And I'd love to hear more about how to manipulate the ratio while running.
Sure. So what Konstantin Buteyko found, a cardiologist in the Ukraine who began studying this stuff in the 50s, and what was later pretty well confirmed, was that he took all of the healthiest people he could find, people who were top athletes, very low resting heart rate, and found in their exhaled breath, they had about 6.5% CO2, sometimes even up to 7% CO2. And all of the sickest people, they all had the same amount of CO2 as well, down to 4%, maybe even 3%, extremely low because they were breathing way too much. So your oxygen, you don't want it to waver too much unless you're doing these breath holds as part of pranayama, which then it's great because you're doing this consciously, but unconsciously, you want oxygen in your body. You want that healthy, 93 and above, 94 and above. So it's basically about, and most healthy people are going to have that amount of oxygen in their bloodstream, but some of them are going to have low levels of CO2, which will make it harder to dislodge that oxygen into tissues and muscles and organs. So for jogging, what is now becoming this hip new thing is hypoxic training, in which you force yourself to breathe much slower than you think you need to. Do this on a grassy field. Don't do this in the middle of the street. Don't ever do this stuff driving or whatever. But this is something that Anders Olsen really specializes in, because once you do that, you raise your tolerance for CO2, and you can immediately feel this. If you're jogging, you can count your breaths. Maybe you're breathing 20, 25, 30 times a minute. Slow that down to half, and chances are you're going to start to feel like heat in your fingers and in the back of your neck. That is circulation increasing throughout your body, and that is a good thing. You want circulation.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. And then John asks, do you think that mouth taping at night would be a good start for someone who has minimal breath practices?
Yes. So people have been asking me a bit. So there is a good way to mouth tape and there is a bad way to mouth tape. And I did a whole a free video. It's on my website. It's also available on YouTube. It's on Facebook. Anyone can see this. Dr. Mark Burhenny, who is an expert in sleep problems. He's a dentist. He wrote a book on this stuff. you're going to go on YouTube and you're going to see people using a huge strip of tape across their mouth. You don't duct tape. No, 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 no. All you need is a little piece of tape about that big. This is surgical tape, sensitive skin, hypoallergenic. You take some of the adhesive off, and that is sleep taping. So that's it. You take it off with your tongue. Don't rip it off. So what you're doing, you're not trying to hermetically seal your mouth shut. No. You're trying to train your jaw at night to not do this. Breathing a third of your life like that is not good for you. It can cause periodontal disease. It can cause more cavities. You're going to have a dry, I give you unfiltered, unconditioned, unhumidified air going into your lungs. Bad news. So not everyone sleeps like that. Some people with really good jaw structure are sleeping with their mouth shut. They don't need mouth tape. I certainly do. I don't have that. And I've been mouth breathing it in my sleep for decades. And I can tell you from my own personal standpoint, what a difference it makes by not doing that. A third of your life, you're getting that much more oxygen. You're pushing the soft tissues to the back of your throat back further because you're not. So that's it. People are there's a bunch of products now on how to do this, different electronic devices. You can use those if you want. I found this $3 roll of tape, which will probably last me 6 months, works just as good for me.
Yeah, I think that's brilliant. The sleep thing is so huge. I mean, the sleep thing is such a pandemic in itself. But what you talked about, the deep sleep, and you didn't say this, but I want to make sure I'm not making an assumption that deep sleep state you're speaking about is the NREM, not the REM.
I will have to look that up. I cannot answer that. I could ask Berhenny, who's the real pro at this stuff.
Yeah, because the NREM is where you're not dreaming, but it's it's a very deep state of sleep where your body does incredible recovery. So many systems are doing recovery. The REM does not do that. And often we're not entering that NREM and we're just going into REM. So we're not able to get that deep rest.
Yeah, he explained it in terms of the blanket of deep sleep, and I'm sure there's permutations from that. And I'm sure that sounds entirely correct. He was looking at ADH vasopressin, which is an antidiuretic hormone, which is only released during these states of deep sleep. So if you're constantly waking up, that's not going to be secreted properly, which isn't going to be soaking up that water, which means you're going to have to urinate over and over at night, which is a chronic problem with people with sleep apnea too. I mean, just as you said, there is a pandemic right now of poor sleep when up to 50% of the population snores, up to a quarter has sleep apnea. It's so damaging. And we're just starting to understand how it plays a role in the onset of diabetes, metabolic problems, neurological problems, Alzheimer's, on and on and on. So to me, I look at those things and that's a breathing problem. So I put it under the umbrella of breathing.
Yeah. Yeah. It's anyone in those sectors, hopefully they can pick this up, because it's the sleep imbalances when people come in and they're working with specialists. Breath work is never part of the care of helping resolve the issues.
And they've found there's this study, I don't know the title of it, but it's fascinating. It's been cited hundreds of times, in which they had people do these oral pharyngeal exercises, people who were snorers, just by stretching their tongue out, it looks ridiculous. They found it had a huge effect in their snoring, because the back of the throat is just like any other muscle or anything. Like, it responds to its input. So if you're exercising it, it's going to tone up.
Yeah.
And I don't know why people aren't told this stuff, why you have to go digging in scientific journals to find this. But I really think this is starting to change in a big way. That's what I've been seeing.
Yes, may it be so. Awesome. So Robert's asking about your workbook. You want to say anything about it?
My workbook.
He says, please talk about your workbook. Do you have a workbook?
I do not have a workbook.
Okay.
I have a Google Calendar, which I can everything into.
Robert, do you want? I don't know.
When I work on a book, it's completely different, but I'm in between books now. So,
Okay. Might be thinking something else. But Robert, raise your hand if you want to say anything about that. And Christina asked, beside the jaw structure and mechanical obstructions that cause disordered breathing, does your book touch on the effects of nervous system dysfunction that can lead to this as well? And I'm thinking of things like shortness of breath and sleep apnea. And I would just add a lens here of trauma, like emotional and acute stress. Anyhow, these other layers to the nervous system dysfunction.
I just see Robert's question about there's a workbook. When you write a book that a few people buy, these awful counterfeiters put out workbooks, and they can't put your name on it, but they put names very similar to yours, and they put them on Amazon and try to sell them as yours. So I have never written a workbook. Whatever that thing is, it has nothing to do with my work. And thanks for bringing that up. This is just the bane of modern existence now. They sometimes just Xerox passages from your book and put it in there and sell it to people. Oh well. Anyway, so nervous system problems. I think the work of Dr. Stephen Porges has been looking at vagal systems and how so many of these seemingly unconnected problems that so many people have are actually related to the autonomic nervous system, specifically the vagal network. And he's found that people with, even sleep apnea, who have gut issues or sexual problems, they have nothing wrong with their individual organs. What they do is have problems with the connectivity of these organs to their brain and the rest of the nervous system. So if you fix that system, all of these problems can disappear at once instead of being treated individually. So, and we're finding that that's absolutely the case. If you look at the parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous system and look at all of the different functions and organs connected to these, if those systems are not working right, those organs can't work right, which can cause mass havoc.
It was information for me about how the parasympathetic, there's more parasympathetic fibers in the lower lobes of the lungs near the diaphragm than the upper lobes. And so even if you look at, if you look at injury or impact or anything that can kind of take your breath away emotionally and physically, you can understand, have an understanding, because this is where the nerves, greater of them, lay. And it really explained why that exhale is so powerful when those fibers of the parasympathetic are there, majority of them.
And you can feel it right now. If people were to put their hand on their heart, you can take an inhale to about 3 and exhale to about 10. And you can just feel your heart lowering and lowering and lowering your heartbeat. And that's the parasympathetic nervous system. And it's not some placebo voodoo magic. This is our biology, and this is how it works. So just by extending your exhale, you're going to be relaxing yourself more.
Thank you. Joelle shares, I used to live at 7,200 feet and climbed to 13,000 feet routinely. What is the influence on breathing when living at high altitude or just visiting high altitude? Does this increase CO2 tolerance?
I believe it increases CO2 tolerance, but what happens to the body is you start building blood at those altitudes, which is why so many Olympians and other elite athletes go to train at high altitude, because they're building more blood, which can carry more oxygen. We do know, I think this is fascinating, that in populations that live at a high elevation, the incidence of COVID are extremely low in Tibet or in the Andes. And they're just now starting to do some research, and they have larger lungs. Usually you are going to be developing larger lung capacity because you need to breathe more. It's especially important to be breathing through your nose at elevation as well. So I believe that there is a strong correlation between lung size and respiratory health and the onset and how you're going to be able to handle COVID. So that probably doesn't answer your question specifically. I do know, obviously oxygen is going to be dropping off the higher you go. So you need to breathe more to get O2. But the work of Luciano Bernardi, he looked at elite hikers who adapted to breathing extremely slowly only through their nose. And these people were able to summit without oxygen to some incredible heights. And he was looking at what was happening to their body and how they were building blood. And that's a study that's widely available online as well.
Wow. Okay, this next question. Thank you from Anne for promoting the importance of the breath. The truth is so simple and basic. Have you read Iyengar's book on light on pranayama? If so, thoughts. Also, is mouth breathing important or essential in the birthing process, labor and delivery?
I cannot answer that. I do not have that expertise as a journalist who's gone into this world. I have read quite a bit of Iyengar's work. I love his quote that, the yogi's life is not measured by his years, but by his breath. So the slower you breathe, the longer, according to this quote, you're going to live. And to me, if you look at other animals, that does make sense. The slower the heart rate, the longer animals live. You look at a whale that breathes 3 times a minute or 4 times a minute, has a very low resting heart rate, and blue whale lives to be 90 or 100. So and you can follow that scale on up. But sorry, I can't answer anything to do with pregnancy or delivery, but I am going to have a Harvard pediatric professor on for a Q&A on Wednesday. We're going to be talking about infant breathing because I've received hundreds of these questions, which I'm not qualified to answer, again, as a journalist, but so he's going to answer them. Infant breathing, infant snoring, infant sleep apnea, other questions related to pregnancy and delivery.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, it's really important how you're creating so many dialogues. I mean, it feels like weekly with experts to help these questions that are coming up.
Well, I don't, and people have questions, and that's wonderful, but I just wanted to make clear in my role in this. I went from not knowing anything about this world and went into this world and talked to experts. So what you're getting is filtered information from experts. And so it's been great that all of them have been very enthusiastic about answering reader questions. No one's selling anything. They're just here to answer questions, and that's it. And everything's going to be available for free. And we're trying to keep up with everything. Some people are complaining it's taken a while, but this is a one-stop shop. It's just me doing this, and we're doing it as fast as we can.
Thank you. Heather has a question too. Just got an oximeter and wondering what other devices do you recommend for the curious yogin? Second question, my chronic gum chewing is really beneficial, ? I've been trying to stop for years, and now this seems to be good news.
So I think a pulse oximeter is a wonderful tool. I think a blood pressure monitor is a wonderful tool. I use both of them quite often. If anything, just to reassure you, because some of these exercises, they don't feel comfortable, especially when exercising. You're like, there's no way I'm breathing enough. If you just have a gauge there to remind you of what's going on, I think that's important. I think it's fun and fascinating to take my blood pressure before and after breathing exercises. I mean, I've been doing this for years as part of the research for the book. But just putting a cuff on, taking my blood pressure, and then breathing differently for 4 minutes, I can sink my blood pressure by 10 or 15 points. And there's been studies showing people with chronic, stage 2 hypertension, just by changing their breathing, they can lower their blood pressure constantly by 30 points. I don't know of any other drug that can do that. So I would start with those two things. If that really entices you, you can get a heart rate variability monitor, which is a wonderful tool looking at your nervous system function as well, and compare and contrast all those.
Thoughts about the gum chewing? I
Oh
assume
yes,
it's a big
I
thing.
knew there
Yeah.
too. So this is controversial, because what I was trying to say in the book was that our lack of chewing through generations has given us these small mouths, just like the one you're seeing here, that without that chewing, especially when we're young, breastfeeding, chewing hard foods, eating real foods, there's going to be less of a chance that your bone mass is going to develop properly, that you're going to be working out all these muscles to have that wide mouth. So there's two thoughts about this. One of which is, yes, you can chew now, and yes, it should have an impact on your airway health. It should be toning it. However, and this is a very important however, if you have TMJ problems, if you've had TMJ problems in the past, if you open your mouth and you hear clicking, or if you have headaches, or if you have ear problems when you open your mouth, all that chewing can exacerbate those problems, which is why I'm not going to do a blanket prescription that everyone needs to chew more. Have your TMJ checked out by someone who is qualified to do this, by a respected ENT or orthodontist, and they can tell you. I personally chew that really weird Feline gum almost every day. I don't have TMJ issues. I love it, and I think it's really helped with some aspects of my breathing.
Yeah, I think the chewing is a whole other journey, because it's actually very important for the digestive system, and the chewing and the digesting of food, and my big debate with all the juicing craze. I think it's quieted down, but just this thing of turning every meal into a smoothie is like, it's a recipe for disaster in your gut.
But I think that's definitely come out. I mean, I remember 10 years ago, there were juice shops all over San Francisco, and then people realized this is just liquid sugar is all it is. You need that fiber. Just eat an orange or eat an apple. Yeah. Like, that's good.
Yeah.
And I think that's, we don't need to liquefy everything. On occasion, it's fine. But that's another thing I was really interesting, is some of these doctors were telling me, think about what you've eaten a day. About 95% of what we eat now is soft. And it didn't used to be that way for the vast majority of our evolution. We were 4 hours a day. And that's one of the reasons we had such powerful jaws.
Mm-hmm. Lauren has a question. Let me make sure I didn't miss anyone. Okay, perfect. This is a very specific question, but I suffer from spontaneous pneumothorax, spontaneous lung collapses. In all of your studies, did you learn anything about this condition and potential ways to breathe to strengthen the weak areas of the lungs, or ways to breathe to help them reinflate quicker when they collapse, may have collapsed?
I have not. That's actually the first I've heard about that, but I'd strongly suggest you get in touch with Anders Olsen or Patrick McEwen, who deal with this. I would imagine that would be caused by a diaphragm that was too high up. I'm not sure. So diaphragmatic movement, very low breaths could help, but I would definitely talk to a qualified therapist. That which I am not.
Thank you for asking the question, Lauren. And Lynn shares, James mentioned constant urination at night as an example of something, but he didn't get the context. Could you explain? And it was about sleep, right, in the middle of the night, the hydration. If
you are not entering different levels of deep sleep, and now I understand that to be NREM is most likely the level, then your body will not get enough of this ADH antidiuretic hormone vasopressin. And vasopressin is the hormone that allows us to store water and not to have to pee all the time. If you wonder how a dog is able to sleep for 10 hours and not not pee. That's why that release of vasopressin. And they've done some studies and some work around this. With sleep apnea, you're constantly waking up and not entering into that restorative stage of deep sleep. And so that could be one of the reasons why you would have low levels of vasopressin and need to urinate more often. I know that during the Stanford study, when I was not sleeping well at all, I was up all the time, and it was awful every couple hours. And once I used the good old mouth tape and started breathing through my nose, I wasn't doing that at all. So I know cause correlation. I'm not saying that that's proof of anything. I'm saying in my own personal research, that's what I experienced.
So Anne has a question about the pause between the in-breath and the out-breath. I don't know if it's it's a statement. Do you have a specific question, Anne? Or are you talking about to speak to that pause, perhaps, like why it's important? I think.
Miriam, can I be heard?
Yes.
Can I be heard? Hi. Okay. So no, that was a response to my previous question. James quoted something from BKS Iyengar that the yogi counts his life in in-breaths and out-breaths. It's actually by the pause between the in-breath and the out-breath.
That's not the quote that I have here.
Okay, good.
Let's do a fact check right now in the live. we can look that up. Yeah.
But so Swami Rama was saying, and I know that this is also in yoga, that each breath should be like a circle, right? There shouldn't be that pause. Everything should be extremely smooth between the inhale and the exhale. But Buteyko says you should extend that time between the inhales and the exhales because you want to build your tolerance for carbon dioxide. So it's different tools. I think they're basically doing the same thing. It depends what school you subscribe to.
Sure.
Yeah. And I think, Anne, I hope I didn't interrupt you. Good.
No, not at all, Miriam. Please go ahead.
And you made a comment about this in an interview too, about, this understanding that yoga, there's a pursuit that goes beyond the physical, the pursuit of transcendence and enlightenment, whatever we want to call it. And in the literature about the pause, it's often that's the portal to enter those transcendent states. It's when you no longer have any awareness of breath or perhaps the need of breath. It's that free diving. It's exactly kind of that moment.
And if you look at Buddhist monks, they've been shown to breathe as little as 2 times a minute or once a minute, and they don't even realize it, And it is very similar to that state in free diving, which is a euphoric state to be in when you're 50, 60, 70 feet down in the water and you feel no need to breathe and you're just part of the natural environment. So there are different tools in the toolbox of breathing. And I don't think that one is better than the other. I think it depends what you're looking for. I do find it's a little hard to navigate through this stuff when one yogi is saying every breath needs to be in a circle, and then a cardiologist is saying, no, you need to extend that time between the breaths. And I think one of the earliest translations of the word pranayama meant the cessation of or the time between breaths. So and there's so many pranayamas that you're holding your breath, and also in ancient Chinese texts, breath holding is a huge part of that too. I find there's benefits to all this stuff. Just depends on what you're looking for.
Yeah, and what the need is. It's also like we may be looking for something, but the need is different. And sometimes it's being attuned to the need versus the wants. So let's see. Okay, Susan and Richard, you and Olson did quite a rigorous self-study that involved a number of medical professionals. Could you reflect on that experience?
Sure. We knew mouth breathing was bad. We just didn't know how quickly that damage would come on. No one's tested it. So I was working with the chief of rhinology research down at Stanford, which is close to my house, which I'm very lucky to have, and their medical library is just world class. And I said, why don't we test this? And he's like, I can't test this. It would be unethical, because he knew all the damage of mouth breathing. So I volunteered, Olson volunteered, and we spent 10 days with silicone up our noses, which was as awful as that sounds. So we were only breathing through our mouths. And the point of this wasn't to do like some jackass stunt. It was because 25 to 50% of the population is breathing from their mouths. And we wanted to see what would happen to our bodies. I'll show you guys a few slides of this. Just a few of these of what happened. So here we go. Sharing now. All right. That's Nyack. That's his team. I mean, this is one of the top rhinology research labs in the world, and he's right at the center. Real good sport for doing this. That's what it looks like to go into his lab, which is as awful as it sounds. And there we are, headed off for 10 days of mouth breathing. And this is interesting. We'll go back here. So to the left is my baseline sleep data. So we took a baseline for about a week or so, and my average snoring per night was either 0 minutes, or this was a big night the night before, 5 minutes out of 8 hours, not bad. And you see to the right is what happened on the first night. So my snoring went way up. We checked our measurements 3 times a day. And here's what happened a few days later. So I went from not snoring at all to a couple minutes to snoring through half the night, just by breathing from my mouth. And that's what it sounded like. I also started experiencing sleep apnea, which I've never had in my life. I started choking on my own body. That's what I sounded like. So I don't know if you can hear that, but it ain't pretty. All right. And we did other studies. We went back to the lab, and here's what happened. So when we switched to nasal breathing, what you see is on the left. I went from, my worst, about 4 hours a night, to 28 minutes. Pretty good. Still not great, but pretty good. And then a couple of days later, I went to 1 minute. And then for the rest of the time, ever since then, I've had, about 1 minute to 0 minutes a night. So there it is, the worst, and on the left, and then on the right, nasal breathing. Sleep apnea went away as well. So there's much more of this in the book, but I will. Here's blood pressure. You guys will like this. So this was it. Immediately when I started mouth breathing, my blood pressure went through the roof. This is serious stage 2 hypertension. Not good. Nasal breathing first day, that's what happened to that. And it didn't stay right at this. Blood pressure fluctuates, and mine fluctuated, but the average, it went down, way down. This was about 4 or 5 days later. And then at the end of 10 days of nasal breathing, that's where my blood pressure was. So it's just, I just don't see a lot of people talking about this stuff too much in regards to how quickly breathing can affect your blood pressure, and do it on a sustained level. And again, as I had said earlier, I don't know any medication that can sink your blood pressure by 30, 40 points in a week and a half. So it's crazy.
It's amazing. It's a gift that we have that ability to do that. It's kind of like we have the tech, we just got to learn how to use it properly. And there's no fault if we've never been taught.
Of course not. And there's no finger pointing at any of the medical institutions at all. Western medicine, maybe people here feel differently, I think is a wonderful gift to humankind. I probably wouldn't be alive without it. If I get in a car accident or break my leg, I want to go. I want Western medicine really, really bad. So these things need to work together. but that doesn't mean you should discount all Eastern medicine. I mean, you've got thousands of years of technology, and I just find it fascinating that so much of modern technology, medical technologies, when they're looking at these old systems, are finding, whoa, they actually work. And to me, it's like, duh, of course they work. They've been used for so long, and people have been measuring their effects for so long as well.
I mean, did you get wrapped up at all in the thinking of, when, like, Yuki actually has a question around this. She says, thank you very much. And I found that the orthopedic breathing to cure scoliosis in the early 1900s was amazing, and wonder why it didn't develop to be the mainstream treatment instead of brace. Any thoughts on that? And along those lines, like, there was so much that you shared of people having empirical, there was like proof that this works, and such a shutdown, such a, bullying, and just kind of, and there's so much history like this in the medical world that's where I think it gets a little bit of a bad rap.
Well, modern science doesn't like empirical studies too much, right? We want to see exactly what's happening, the biochemistry of breathing, to believe it. What's interesting, though, is you can do those studies as well, and they're showing it completely checks out. That's why I think you've got thousands of years of empirical study, but now you have modern science where they're showing what's happening on a molecular level when we breathe a certain, even at an atomic level when we breathe a certain way, and how it affects us so drastically. So I kept finding these stories. I was not looking for them, of people like Stow, who developed this breathing technique, teaches it for 10 years at all the top VA hospitals. It works wonders. He leaves, it disappears. Katharina Schroth was the same, not exactly the same, but teenager, scoliosis, breathed her spine straight again, helped other people do the same exact thing. She was derided the vast majority of her professional career, but then at the end of her life, she was given a medal by the German government for her contributions to medicine. So it only took them 30 years to come around. And I think the reason is a lot of this therapy is intense, it's one-on-one, and we just don't have this. I mean, we've got to heal populations, right? Blanket populations with this stuff. And a lot of this is one-on-one, very specialized therapy. So it's a shame, but I do see a lot more interest in the diaphragmatic movement, and Stow's work coming back big time now.
Yes, I hope so. I mean, this is a whole kind of philosophical inquiry about the ancient scientists did not need that evidence to be clear with the wisdom. And what is happening to us that we need that? Is there a lack of trust in ourselves?
I think it had a lot to do with so many hucksters selling false cures and snake oil for so long. You look 200 years ago, most of medicine was complete garbage, and these people are just making money off of it. So in some ways, it's positive that you need so much proof for something to work. Like, it should be able to be checked out. But in other ways, people have become so resistant to things not in the medical canon. And my opinion is, if you can measure it, you can study it. And if you can study it, you can find out if it works or not. Like, science is the exploration of the unknown. So why don't we measure this stuff instead of having preconceived notions? Even if it sounds crazy, why don't you measure it? And why don't you study it? That's how things get pushed forward, I think.
Yeah, I think that's reality of where we are. And, I'm in a field of yoga and yoga therapy, and for the integration of yoga and yoga tools into the medical world, it will only happen because of studies. That's it.
And luckily we have the instruments to measure this stuff. And now people are going out and really measuring it. You see this happening. There's a big initiative at Harvard, top research institutions in the world. They're very much into complementary medicine right now. Same thing at Stanford. So sometimes it just takes a while. We're all impatient, but it just takes a while for these things to catch on. And hopefully now is that time when they're starting to catch on.
Yeah, and for one thing that's been really huge has been Dr. Borges's work on the polyvagal theory and HRV. It's been the biggest shift, and the fact that you integrated that so well, but it's still recently been kind of pushed against that it's just a theory. So there's the naysayers about it as well.
When I have a hard time with some of that, when you can put sensors on someone and watch them completely shift states within 2 minutes, that doesn't seem very theoretical to me. It seems like that is proof that something is happening. And, it's with all science, it just, as I was saying, sometimes it can take a while. We just got to, keep going, keep doing it, keep testing things, and hopefully things will come around.
Okay, Robert asked, earlier you said by extending your exhale, you will relax more. Regarding nasal breathing, what are your thoughts about deep inhaling through the nose, but occasionally long extended exhaling through the mouth? Thank you.
I think that when we exhale through the mouth, we are reducing the moisture in our bodies by about 40%. I know that some ancient Chinese texts say always breathe through the nose, exhale through the mouth. I know Louis Ignarro, who won the Nobel Prize for his work in nitric oxide, suggests exhaling through the mouth. But I personally have not seen too many details on the reasons to do that. By exhaling through the nose, you're slowing down that breath and allowing your body to absorb more oxygen. So you have to take fewer breaths, which is good. You're saving moisture. You're creating positive pressure on the soft tissues at the back of your throat. So my personal feeling, and this is open for debate, is that inhaling and exhaling through the nose is great. If you sometimes exhale through the mouth, I know that's fine. The real key to all of this is always inhale through the nose.
Yeah, I think we're a fan of the pursed lipped exhale, inhale through the nose, but it's really because of the activation of certain nerves and what it does to the calming of the nervous system, but it's for a short period of time.
I should have been more specific there. When you're talking about specific practices and techniques, it doesn't matter if 100 of your breaths out of 25,000 a day are through the mouth. I've been breathing through my mouth as I'm talking to you. I'm going to breathe the rest of the day and night through my nose. So conscious practices are completely different. There's some that, you're breathing like that. That's fine. I'm talking about habitually breathing.
Thank you. And Anna asked, Joel Fisherman from New York, Dr. Joel Fisherman, has done published research in using side plank position in treating scoliosis. Any thoughts?
That's fantastic. Yeah, I'll show you a picture right here. Maybe we'll just leave with this little vignette. I'm going to show you, we were talking about Schroth and her work. So here is a scoliosis patient. They really didn't know what to do with these girls. They gave them a wheelchair and a brace and told them to have a good life. Schroth had different thoughts about it. That's how she started training herself, by breathing into one lung and then the other, moving her body. And this side plank is coming up here, which is why I wanted to show you this. She'd have these women come out. Some of them had such severe scoliosis, they couldn't even look up. There's your side plank. So she was doing this, 50, 60 years ago, and stretching and breathing and allowing the body to heal itself.
Mm-hmm.
And just had an incredible effect and benefit for these people. I mean, there it is right there. So side plank breathing sounds great. I've never heard of that, but I think there's a long tradition of people using that.
Yes, and scoliosis, it's interesting because it's the ability to also not do the same thing on either side, and to breathe into the side that needs the medicine of the breath too. I think that also, that awareness, the subtleties of even the differences of the right. I mean, it's interesting how the right lungs are so different than the left lungs, and why, and how we use them. Okay, so I feel we are in a good place. I would love, if you're comfortable, to lead a breath practice. Are you comfortable to do that?
I do not do that. I try to stay out, leave that to the real professionals. I am a journalist looking into this stuff. I practice this stuff, but when I'm led from people, I know that you are a professional here who has years, decades of experience. So.
Yeah, so I will share. Thank you. You know, I feel you've taught us a lot about our breath. So, you know, you have expertise as well. I'm grateful to you, and just a moment to please receive the gratitude from us for your work, James. Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for joining as well. I'll share some of Vritti. Vritti are the fluctuations, and some is the balancing of the fluctuations, so that they are in harmony and they mirror each other. The inhale mirrors the exhale. And we have asanas like samastiti. We have mental practices like samyama. And this word is really important. And I felt the breath that James kept bringing up, this idea of the perfect breath, and the study of this breath that is balanced and reflecting each other between 5 and 6.5 seconds, had incredible healing properties for the body. So one of your recommendations, James, was to just even pause, right, throughout the day, and to do this type of breath. So I'm inviting this pause right now. And so let's experience before we close. Let's take a comfortable seat, maybe roll the shoulders, a little wiggle wobble if been very kind of stagnant and rigid. And invite a soft exhale as we land. Let the eyes gently focus, whether to close or turn downwards. And although the invitation is this 5.5 second inhale and exhale, let's first just bring the mind to focus on the rhythm of your breath. And follow it with your mind, especially the exhale. As you exhale and as the lungs are getting hugged, feel an arriving, a softening, a landing. And I will count just for 2 rounds and then leave it up to you to just be with it for a few rounds. You may count it or just experience the feeling of a balanced breath. And so begin to gently inhale for 2, 3, 4, 5. Out, 2, 3, 4, 5. In, 2, 3, 4, 5. Out, 2, 3, 4, 5. And you may be a little shorter, a little longer than that. Just take a few rounds, inviting the experience of Samavritti, creating balance. So it's like you're watching the waves of the ocean. Inviting an exhale, you can gently blink the eyes open. May all of your breath practices, and may this book be a continued catalyst to bring you to that place of peace and well-being within yourself. James, offer you space for final words, inspiration.
Just thank you all for showing up. I obviously love talking about this stuff. I'm excited about it now as I ever have been, and really see the potential for everyone to do this. So thank you very much. Pleasure trying to answer your questions.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Have a beautiful evening. Gratitude. And I've been very motivated, so I may offer a 3-week series in the next few weeks to use the book and explore some of the practices that are invited and the whys around it, so we can continue our own study and excavation.
Thank
you. Bye-bye. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Miriam.
Gratitude. Thank you.